If everyone could take their seats, we're going to get started.
How are you? Nice to see you.
I have a funny anecdote about that. I'll tell you after.
Do you? Oh, good.
No funny anecdotes.
It was great.
No, they're done. We're just trying to wait for people to take their seats.
Really kind of think it through. And anyhow.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, our pleasure.
Okay, good morning. It looks like most people are taking their seats, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Taylor Hawes. I'm the Colorado River Program Director for the Nature Conservancy, and I will be moderating our panel today. It's always great to be here. There's so many great folks to catch up with and good conversations to be had, problems to be solved, and everybody's all in one place. It's pretty amazing. When I was checking in Tuesday night and it was kind of late, I'd had a long day, missed my flight, and the guy who was checking me in said, "What are you here for? You know, what brings you to Vegas?" And I said, "Oh, I'm here for a Colorado River Water Conference." And he's like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And I said, "Water management, water sustainability." And he stopped what he was doing. He's like, "For 3 days?" And I was like, "Yes, you have no idea." And yet, even though we're all ready to leave by Friday and get back to our homes, I feel like there's always conversations that I wanted to have that I missed, or I missed finding a certain person that I wanted to talk to. So 3 days isn't even really enough, but it is an amazing pilgrimage every year, and it's a pretty amazing community that we have. You heard folks reference that this morning, that we all are so able to work with each other and find solutions and work across and through our differences. So it's pretty incredible community to be part of. So thanks all for being here. So our panel this morning is going to hopefully be building on the panel that you heard this morning. We're going to be diving into the details of system conservation, which is one of the more promising tools for how we might deal with drought contingency planning in both basins in some form or another as we move into the future. I think it's fair to say that you cannot throw a rock in any direction in the basin, especially towards any of the big universities within the basin or basin states, without hitting a recent study that says the basin's future is going to be hotter and drier. And then we've got more people moving here, and that's the reality that we're facing and the reality that we're trying to manage within. I think it's also fair to say that all of us would prefer to have solutions in place ahead of a crisis. We may not have perfect solutions ahead of a crisis, but our goal really does need to be having some solid solutions or frameworks in place to deal with the crisis ahead of time. I think it was within that vein that the 4 major water providers in the basin and the Bureau of Reclamation came together in 2013 and 2014 to launch the System Conservation Program. And it's basically, as Greg Hobbs likes to say, because Mother Nature bats last. And so we always have to be ready. We're dealing with weather. Part of our job is to deal with the whims of weather. And so we have to be ready no matter what happens. So the System Conservation Program has operated pretty independently in both basins, upper and lower basin. I think the lower basin was quite a bit easier to launch, actually, because folks were used to programs like that through the Intentionally Created Surplus Program. Lake Mead sits above the system, so it's much easier to operate. And the challenges in the lower basin were more about volumes of water, like really ramping up the program, and a sense of urgency. In the upper basin, the challenge has been quite different. There's never been a program like this before, so there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of suspicion, there's a lot of people that think that this is a lower basin problem, and why do we need to be doing anything right now? And there's also a lot of legal and technical questions that we have to work through. And in fact, every time we peel back one layer of the onion, we find 10 more questions. And so we're working through those issues kind of systematically, but there's still a lot of questions that we need to work through, and you'll probably hear some of that in the panel today. And there's also the geographic reality that PAL sits below the water users, as Don mentioned this morning, and that presents its own set of challenges. So the tempo is a little slower in the upper basin than in the lower basin. So our panelists today are going to discuss how the pilot program has gone to date so far, the lessons learned, some of the challenges that we're finding, some of the opportunities that we're finding, and hopefully provide us a little glimpse into the future. We have 2 administrators of the program for the Upper and Lower Basin, and we have 2 participants for the program in the Upper and Lower Basin. We're going to have each speaker give about a 10 to 12-minute presentation, and then I'll have some questions, and maybe we'll get, I hope, a few questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to run through quick introductions of our speakers so you know who you're hearing from, and then we'll just run through the presentations from there. Our first speaker is Steve Venden. Steve has served as Reclamation's chief for the Boulder Canyon Operations Office since 2008, and he has been with the Bureau of Reclamation for an impressive 36 years. That's pretty incredible. Steve is responsible for overseeing daily Colorado River operations, water contract, and water accounting. He is also responsible for implementing the interim guidelines operations between Lakes Powell and Meade, and he's been overseeing the system conservation program in the Lower Basin. Our next speaker will be Amy Haas. Amy is the Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel of the Upper Colorado River Commission, and she's been in that role since June. Previously, Amy worked as General Counsel for the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission and has served as New Mexico's Upper Colorado River Commissioner and Colorado River State's representative. Our third speaker is Governor Stephen Roe Lewis. Stephen serves as the governor of the Gila River Indian Community and was the lieutenant governor prior to being elected governor in 2014. Governor Lewis serves on numerous boards both within the community and beyond, and he oversees the implementation of the community's water settlement of 2004. His vision is to support a new generation of community member agriculturalists with the goal of promoting and protecting the community's water and agricultural development for future generations. And our final panelist will be Mark Harris. Mark is the general manager of the Grand Valley Water Users Association, and he's been in that role since 2013. Grand Valley Water Users is in Grand Junction, Colorado, right on the Utah-Colorado border in western Colorado. And the Grand Valley Water Users operates 50 miles of canals, over 130 miles of laterals, and 100 miles of drainage facilities. Mark's lived on the family farm since 1958 and has been active in agricultural, business, water, civic concerns on a local, state, and national level. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Good morning, everyone. First thing I would say is one of the things with a pilot program is you're testing new concepts and new things. As it turns out, we're even testing the name of the program. We have a slightly different name in each basin that we've assigned to the program. In the Lower Basin, we've been calling it the Pilot System Conservation Program. I would note that in the Upper Basin, it's referred to as the System Conservation Pilot Program. So maybe Amy and I are going to arm wrestle afterwards to figure out which name we're going to go with. But for purposes of my talk, I'm going to simply call it the Pilot Program. Okay. Now I'll advance. The pilot program had its origins in a historic funding agreement that was signed on July 30th, 2014. And the parties to this agreement included Reclamation, the Central Arizona Water Conservation District, Metropolitan Water District, the Southern Nevada Water Authority, and Denver Water. And I say historic because for the first time, entities came together from both basins to try out a pilot program on a basin-wide basis. They pooled their financial resources. We collectively came up with $11 million. And the idea was to go out and see if we could get water users to agree to voluntary conservation projects to conserve water, to retain in Lake Powell and Lake Meade as system water to help mitigate the impacts of the ongoing drought. And so the program is implemented a little bit differently in the Upper Basin. It's implemented by the Upper Colorado River Commission, and in Reclamation, the Lower Colorado region through my office is administering the program. not sure where to
Go
point
this
this thing.
direction.
Okay. So, following up on the music theme, the funding agreement itself was our sheet of music, but we discovered there were a few missing notes that we had to fill in. And those kinds of notes included, under the funding agreement, there had to be unanimous decision-making kind of on every step of the way in terms of the program. So we had to figure out how to come together and work together and make those types of decisions. We also had to deal with issues like how do we invoice each other for funding, to move funding around to get to the projects we were funding. Also how we were going to obligate money in the federal financial system. So a lot of issues like that weren't dealt with in the funding agreement that we had to figure out. Ultimately, we kind of came up with a four-step process to implement the program. The first step was to go out to the water users and seek proposals. The second step was to get together and select projects for funding, and there were criteria laid out in the funding agreement as to what we would use for those criteria. Cost per acre foot was certainly a major one, but we're also looking for diversity in terms of types of projects, the different types, getting projects from different classes of water users, getting projects that were geographically dispersed, and also we wanted to test new concepts. We also needed to figure out, and the third step was how to structure agreements to implement the program. So in the lower basin, we used a 3-agreement process. We had a implementation agreement that we utilized with the selected project participant. For each project, there was an internal agreement among the funding partners as to how much funding each entity would contribute to the project. And then finally, in the lower basin, we had a mechanism, an agreement with the junior priority user in the state where the project was, where that entity would agree not to order the water that would otherwise flow through them through the state priority system. Kind of moving to the program in the lower basin, or excuse me, the funding. Maybe I skipped one here.
No, I thought it went past.
Okay. So in terms of funding, we have currently about $23 million that have been obligated. That's about double the original funding amount that was contributed to the program. So we've had additional federal funding as well as funding from the partners. In the upper basin, there's been about $4.5 million. I say approximately, I know Amy will provide the precise amount, and approximately 22,000 acre feet that have been conserved to date. In the lower basin, we've obligated $18.6 million. The federal, non-federal cost share has been roughly 50-50. As we moved along, it alters a little bit as more money's put into the program. And I might say that's been very important, this cost share, in terms of the federal government getting additional funding for the program to be able to demonstrate that we're getting funding from non-federal partners. We have conserved, or will conserve, approximately 117,000 acre feet in Lake Mead to date. I would say about 80% of that water is already in the lake, and some of the water is still being developed by ongoing projects. And the average cost has been, over the whole program in the lower basin, is $160 an acre foot. So I want to give you a little feel for the types of projects that have been funded to date. There's been 10 projects. We've had 3 system efficiency projects, and I might mention what those projects are. One is removing turf on a golf course, and the savings from that, and substituting gravel or just basically gravel. So reducing the irrigation footprint of the golf course. Another project in California with an irrigation district to install drip irrigation systems on some of the fields there. And then an interesting project in Arizona with a municipal entity where there was a municipal effluent that was simply being evaporated into the atmosphere and lost to the system. And so under this particular project, there were 2 injection wells that were constructed, and now the treated effluent is being injected into the Colorado River aquifer. That results in more return flow credit for Arizona, and it's essentially an additional annual supply of 4,400 acre feet to the system. So that's a very unique project that was constructed under the program. We have one agricultural land fallowing project, and we have 3 projects. I think they're all in Arizona in terms of foregone banking. So within the Central Arizona project, some of the tribes who ordinarily take some of their CAP water and they store it underground, they are not storing it underground and they're leaving it in Lake Mead. So 3 projects there. We also had within Arizona a local water supply substitution project. This involves the Central Arizona project ag users who essentially relied on other supplies instead of taking CAP water, relied on other supplies like groundwater to irrigate with. And then finally, 2 water importation projects in Nevada where muddy and virgin river tributary water was imported into Lake Mead, and it accrued from fallowing of lands in those 2 river basins. One important mechanism to make this work in the lower basin is that as part of our process, the project participants, they have to turn in a reduced water order to reclamation, and then the junior user in the state where the project is located, and in some cases there's multiple junior users, they have to not agree to not order that water so that we can leave it in Lake Mead as system water. So I guess to summarize, I would say I think we've proven that we can go out there and obtain voluntary projects from water users to conserve water in Lake Mead. We've been able to do this at I think a fairly reasonable cost. Average cost has been, like I said, $160 an acre foot. We've had a wide variety of projects. All classes of water users have participated. I would mention that we've had 3 Native American communities, the Gila River Indian community, the Tohono O'odham Nation, and the Colorado River Indian tribes who have all participated in the program. And between or among the 3 of those Native American communities, almost half of the water that has been conserved to date has come from these 3 tribal entities. So we very much appreciate the involvement of the tribes in this program, as well as we've had agricultural users, cities, pretty much all classes of users have participated. The water, that 117,000 acre feet, it equates to about 1.4 feet in Lake Mead. That quantity of water, along with water that's been conserved under other programs in the lower basin, and it's upwards of close to 20 feet now, has helped us avert shortage in the lower basin the last 3 years. And I would mention that, pleased to report that the pilot program, because of the extensive collaboration and cooperation involving a broad spectrum of users and funders in both basins, was recently the recipient of the John Keyes Award for building partnerships and strengthening relationships. In conclusion, I would say in the lower basin, the next steps, we've gone out and are currently soliciting projects in 2018 for another round of projects, and so we look forward to receiving those projects and deliberating and selecting more projects for funding. And then I would mention Under the Continuing Appropriations Act of 2015, there's a requirement that Reclamation submit a report to Congress by September 30th of 2015, making a recommendation about whether the pilot program should continue and in what form. So we'll be working during 2018 with the funding partners and others to develop this report. Thank you.
Good morning. Again, it's good to be here this morning to speak from an Upper Basin perspective on the System Conservation Pilot Program. Steve has already discussed the distinction in nomenclature. The Upper Basin refers to its System Conservation Pilot Program as just that, and we abbreviate, as we do in all things Colorado River, as SCPP. Before I jump in, however, I'd like to preface my remarks by saying that, they really reflect my position and not that of the Upper Colorado River Commission or any of its staff. So in 2014, the Upper Colorado River Commission adopted a resolution regarding development of a drought contingency plan in the Upper Basin. And one of the three aspects of this plan is what we have coined demand management. And I think that Don Osler did a great job of explaining that single prong of our three-part plan this morning. The System Conservation Pilot Program is a subset of this larger demand management objective. The Commission's objective in system conservation is really twofold. First, to help ensure that Lake Powell does not reach critical elevations, and also to ensure that the Upper Basin's ongoing compact compliance with the 1922 compact in particular, continues without impairing existing water rights. Also in 2014, and as Steve briefly mentioned, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Arizona Water Conservancy District, the Metropolitan Water District of California, Central Arizona Water Conservancy District, and Denver Water entered into a funding agreement to provide monies for system conservation in the Lower Basin for a 2-year period with an option to fund programs in the Upper Basin. The program was designed to determine whether voluntary compensated conservation measures in both the Upper and the Lower Basins could create system water that would benefit the basin generally. The Upper Basin opted to participate in the program and decided that the UCRC, the Upper Colorado River Commission, would be the most appropriate entity to administer that. This is a forward.
Yep, a light touch.
A light touch. Okay. Some facts about the first 3 years of the SCPP in the Upper Basin. Again, and as Steve mentioned, this was originally a 2-year pilot program through the years 2015 and 2016. However, there were 2 one-year extensions. And while there are 5 funders supporting the Upper Basin DCP, the Walton Family Foundation also provided funding through Denver Water for Upper Basin projects in 2017. We had 10 projects in the first year. We had Wyoming and Colorado participating on behalf of the Upper Division states. 20 projects in 2016 with all 4 Upper Division states participating. 15 projects in 2017, and again with participation from all 4 Upper Division states. The total applications we received in the first 3 years are on the order of 93. And there was more than 22,000 acre-feet estimated consumptive use savings at a total cost of, okay, Steve, I'm going to get as precise as possible here, $4,500,055, $747. How's that? I managed to botch that. 4.555. How's that? Let's go on to the next. My light touch is not. Some general information about programs for the first 3 years of the SCPP, and I hope that this is a color slide. It looks like it is. In 2015, we had one fallowing project, and that's represented in orange, and that was Grand Valley Farms in Colorado on the main stem. We had one alternative cropping project, which is represented by green, and that was on the Uncompahgre River in Colorado. One combo fallowing split season deficit irrigation project, and that's represented in pink, and that was a project involving various tribs on the Colorado West Slope. And one municipal project, which is represented by this blue box, and that was on the South Fork Eagle River near Pueblo, Colorado, and that really involved reducing Pueblo's demand for Colorado River water. We also had 6 split-season deficit irrigation projects, and that's represented by the fuchsia color. We had 5 in Wyoming, including projects on Fontanelle, Cottonwood, Middle Piney Creeks, and then 1 in Colorado on the Yampa River. In 2016, we had, again, participation from all 4 Upper Division states, and notably, we had a municipal irrigation project in Bloomfield, New Mexico, and that was on the San Juan River, involving a more efficient sprinkler system for ballparks, and a fallowing project also on the San Juan. And in Utah, we had a multi-year alternative cropping and deficit irrigation project and fallowing project on Farron Creek. In 2017, we again had participation from all 4 Upper Division states. And while there were fewer contracted projects in 2017, about 5 less than 2016, there were larger projects. For instance, on the Colorado River in Colorado, Grand Valley Water Users Association, which is Mark's organization, undertook a combination fallowing split-season deficit irrigation project with an estimated conserved consumptive use savings of 3,178 acre-feet, which is the highest potential savings of any project during the 3-year pilot. Also, and notably on the San Juan River in New Mexico, the Navajo Nation, through the Navajo agricultural products industry, participating in a fallowing project with an estimated conserved consumptive use savings of 2,901 acre-feet. Again, the second highest potential savings of any Upper Basin SCPP project, and the first tribal project to participate in the Upper Basin. Additionally, Wyoming had nearly all members within a tributary watershed enroll in the program in 2017. In August of this year, due to continued interest in the SCPP and a desire in the Upper Basin to learn as much as possible with respect to the feasibility of such a program, the UCRC decided to extend the program an additional year through 2018 with the support or the continued support of the 5 funders. 2018 proposals, again, Steve mentioned this with respect to the lower basin, but in the upper basin, those proposals have also been submitted. We've received 30 in all for an estimated consumptive use savings of approximately $34,000, and we'll be evaluating these proposals throughout the month of January. So this is kind of a mashup slide of all of the projects for the first 3 years of the pilot. And I'd like to make a few general observations. The previous panel did a great job, in my opinion, of teeing up some of the more difficult legal and policy questions associated with demand management and system conservation in particular. First of all, there's a question of scale. In 2015, the first year of the pilot, we estimated that approximately 2,654 acre-feet of water was conserved in the Upper Basin. So that's equivalent to about 1% of the active storage in Lake Powell and about 3% of the annual 2015 inflow into Powell. Upper Basin modeling suggests that we would need to conserve in the neighborhood of 200,000 acre-feet to make a meaningful contribution to Powell. And at roughly $190 an acre-foot, we've averaged between $180 and $190 an acre-foot for the first 3 years of the program. This may require, in the neighborhood of $38 million to really make a difference at Powell. And we found that the administration has been somewhat cumbersome. I mean, this is a learning experience, but it has been at times difficult to navigate all of the involvement of the various stakeholders and funders. In our case, the upper division representatives, the participants, the UCRC, and reclamation in review of the multiple agreements, some of which Steve mentioned, required for each project. So we know that we need to find a way to streamline so we are not delaying implementation of projects on the ground. And I'd like to note that, we have implemented some improvements for this latest extension into 2018. And I think we have done a good job in terms of creating template agreements. We've got a template program agreement and a single programmatic funding agreement, and we've already seen some of the benefits of streamlining the contracting and administrative processes. And then finally, and something that we've heard throughout, I think, CRWUA and the discussion that's been ongoing in both basins, is that there are some legal considerations and concerns that we need to work through with respect to SCPP in the Upper Basin, and shepherding is one of those. Shepherding water from a conservation project to the state line and ultimately downstream to Powell without the threat of intervening diversion from a downstream diverter raises both intrastate and interstate legal issues, and those need to be worked through clearly. There's been lots of discussion and research on this issue of late, but it remains unresolved, and something that I think, in terms of having a longer term, more operational program, we need to resolve. Included in this discussion of shepherding is whether, state statutes would need to be modified to allow for shepherding of water and storage of water for compact compliance purposes. Also, whether and how the authorities of the UCRC under the 48 Compact could be brought to bear to resolve some of these shepherding issues. So that's something that the Commission has yet to weigh in on, but it's certainly part of this ongoing discussion regarding the permanence of such a program. Also, and again, something that Don Osler, I think, did a fine job of touching on this morning, demand management is quite different in the Upper Basin than it is in the Lower Basin for various reasons, not the least of which is that Powell sits below our water users. So if we've got good hydrology, we cannot take advantage of some of that conserved water because it's below our water users. On the flip side, in the Lower Basin, Lake Mead sits above those water users. So in the event that it is conserved certain volumes, it can take advantage of those later. So we're working through some of these issues. And then finally, we've got a whole slew of lessons learned, and this is a very select list. I'm going to touch on a few of these lessons learned and considerations that I think we need to take to heart to support a longer-term program. The first is, what should be the role or the scope of a permanent SCPP? For instance, should it be an intermittent tool used as needed only when Powell hits those critical elevations that I mentioned, or a vehicle to implement more localized water banking options to benefit some upper water interests or users? And then also, how do we manage risk and determine appropriate levels of conservation given hydrologic variability? For instance, are there opportunities for using surplus conserved water in the Upper Basin that is not needed in an unanticipated wet year? For instance, through a water bank, and again, Jennifer Gimble asked that question this morning. I think that John Ensminger answered it. The Upper Basin hasn't taken a position on a water bank, but it is part of this ongoing discussion. And then to build upon that, if there were such a water bank, who could claim credits in that water bank? Only the states that participated in the program, would they be able to avail themselves of those credits? Or would it be a collective effort? I mean, our compact obligation is a collective one, and it's shared by each one of the 4 Upper Division states. And then finally, how would those credits be used upstream, given that Powell is below Upper Basin water users, which I just touched on? Finally, and really critically, this is this program has attracted a lot of interest, and I think one of the considerations moving forward is how do we capture the interest that the program has created and the momentum that it's created in these 4 years. Would any sort of a break in the implementation of the SCPP thwart interest in the program, or potential funding opportunities? I think these are all things we need to be thinking about. Finally, to play into the tempo metaphor of the title of this panel, I would propose a more deliberate andante as something that might be preferable in terms of going forward with the SCPP until we can resolve some of these larger questions, rather than a brisk allegro, which I think is the path that we're on currently. So with that, thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here. My name is the Governor, Stephen Rowe Lewis, and I am the Governor for the Gila River Indian community. And it's an honor to present our story of the Yakima, O'odham, and Peeposh and how we've been addressing some critical issues here. And I'm also honored to have some of our council members as well and some of our legal team made up of our very own community members as well. And if I can have them stand, just for everyone to see that we have a very, thank you, that we have our team here. And so, you know, it begins. And for us, you know, water was an important resource from time immemorial. You know, we trace our historic connections to the O'odham and the great and vast and complicated and marvelous water infrastructure and canal systems that they built, that modern day Phoenix is built upon. And we proudly and we continually honor those connections. And especially just 4 days ago, we honored and we revisited and we recommitted ourselves to protecting our water. This would be the 13th anniversary of the Arizona Water Settlement Act. And we had our own ceremonies and our own festivities in Sackatone, which is the seat of power to the Gila River Indian community. And so, you know, it's a time of, and it has been a time of reflection as well. With these critical issues that we're dealing with moving forward. So with this first slide, touching on the Arizona Water Settlement Act, and this provided the infrastructure for the funding for our water. But of course, like all settlements, it included a number of trade-offs. But more importantly, it included a large entitlement and funding to ensure that our water could be used on community lands for agriculture, for farming, intensive farming areas, for our ranchers and our ranching traditions, our horse traditions go back many years. Our agricultural traditions go back millennia. And so this is where we have come from. This is who we are. This is the story of the Gila River Indian community. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay. Sometimes you got to start back from the beginning. Now, you know, with our water settlement, I talked about the trade-offs. One of the trade-offs was that the natural flow of our beloved Gila River was not restored as part of the water settlement. And instead, of course, as we all know, by the design of the Colorado River Basin Project Act, the community received Colorado River water as a supplement or in lieu supply for the Gila River water. And so this made the community, which is important, the single largest entitlement holder of Colorado River water and served by the Central Arizona Project. But with this large amount of Colorado River water also came risks associated with the rising costs of CAP delivery charges. And as you can see, our annual entitlement is 311,800 acre feet. So under our settlement, the community has two types of Colorado River water with different priorities within the CAP. Our non-Indian AG, or NIA, water has lower priority than our Indian priority water. The community has about 120,000 acre feet of NIA CAP water, and it's that water that is put at risk. The community currently uses this water to generate revenue to offset the future costs related to its on-reservation Colorado River water use. So a reduction in this supply would interfere with our long-term planning. And I think that's one of the things that our current council, that we have accomplished, accomplishing our first short-term and long-term water planning plan. And so, of course, as you know, there are a lot of moving parts, and one affects the other. And to some degree, they are all related. So we go and we talk about DCP and DCP Plus. And it's important for you all to know, again, what DCP Plus is. What is the purpose of DCP Plus? And it is to create incentives for Arizona water entitlement holders to leave water in Lake Mead to reduce the risk of the elevation falling below, of course, 1075, and thereby reducing the likelihood that DCP cuts in Arizona will be required. So the two incentives proposed under the DCP Plus are paid system conservation and tribal ICS. And because tribes have large entitlements of Colorado River water, they're naturally going to have to be a part of any program going forward for this to be successful. The community in particular anticipates a major role because it has such a large entitlement and has been putting this entitlement to use. And it's important, that this aligns with our value system. The community always has cared for and respected our water and took great pride and a stewardship into not ever wasting water. And so we feel, as a community, that because of our entitlement, I think that's, we're talking about the themes of music, but I'm more of a comic book person. And what is one of my son's favorite comic book was Spider-Man. And what is that? With great power comes great responsibility. And I think for the community, I think with our entitlement, we have great responsibilities, not only to our community's future, but to the surrounding region as well. We know that we're all interrelated. The water indeed connects us all. And so we see ourselves also as having a moral imperative as well in this, that this matches up with our O'odham Peeposh stewardship over the water and the land, the natural resources. So, okay, I believe I've run out of slides now. So, and it's also important to note too that under the pilot, and we as a community strongly believe that the pilot program is successful, and it provides a framework moving forward. Of course, and I think it's important for us is that our pilot project, we brought in water at an acre feet of $150, and that was $10 below the U.S. pilot program as well. So that's something that we see as a success moving forward. We also see as a success building up our naturally occurring water aquifers as well, our underground water. So during times of need, during the agricultural season, we aren't, well, in fact, we're being able to build up our water supply, our underground water supply, and to use that groundwater, and to give the community that flexibility, so that we aren't relying upon the over-allocated Colorado River and CAP water, but we're actually building up our underground water supply. And what we're doing, and going back to the beginning of the slide, was also building up our riparian wetlands areas, those areas along the Gila River. Actually finally finding an opportunity to bring back the flow of the Gila River in a very real, practical sense. And so we're using and plotting out these managed aquifer recharge sites as opportunities just to do just that. And we have also our director here, Mr. Dave DeJong, from our Pima Maricopa Irrigation Project. That's the community's water delivery project that was funded under our water settlement. And he's in the trade show, and they have, I believe, a video, and they have information just on that, just on our state-of-the-art water delivery system, and also some information on our managed aquifer recharge site. So I would encourage you to go in and to learn more about that, because that's really have become a point of pride for our community, is those MAR sites, those riparian areas that we're actually rebuilding. The land is actually regenerating, but also, using that as an opportunity to build up our groundwater supplies as well, and our recharge areas. And so that's really, in that way, we've seen some great successes under the pilot project. Our opportunities to leave water in Lake Mead. And of course, I think there are opportunities to do that. And the community's role in that is very simple, is that over the short term, we can make a large portion of its Colorado River water available to help Lake Mead above 1075. And we have already provided, at this point, 90,000 acre-feet in system conservation through 2017. And if needed and desired, we could, if asked, of course, in a timely way, make more water available in 2018 and beyond. And we can do this because of, again, talking about our water planning efforts that have already begun, and planning for the future to address the rising cost of water, and also which allows us to pivot very strategically to address regional drought, as we all know. So we are, as a community, accelerating our efforts to increase our groundwater storage capacity and well infrastructure, so we can rely, again, on groundwater as a supplemental supply during the peak growing periods. So again, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
It is surprising how dry these water meetings make you. Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you, CRWUA, for having us, and thanks, Taylor, for putting the panel together. I have to share a little bit of the conversation Taylor and I had putting it together. This was my first trip to CRWUA and relatively new to the water business, and contrary to many of you that are here. And I told her I was pretty concerned about being up to the task of delivering this message, and she said, "Don't worry about it, Mark. They're not going to expect much."
I did not say that.
True. No fake news here. The other thing I'm doing is usually for those of you who have seen me present before, I have a beautiful well-developed set of slides that my front office puts together for us. And I told Penny this time I was going to do it without those slides. She said, "Good luck." But I am the general manager of the Grand Valley Water Users in Grand Junction. And I have no tempo or music-related metaphor today. It's more of a cacophony than a symphony that's in my head most of the time. But for many of you who studied piano, as soon as you get into those yellow books that don't have any pictures in them anymore, my days on the piano were over. The Grand Valley Water Users is the managing entity for a reclamation project in the Grand Valley called the Grand Valley Project, oddly enough. We are on the western slope of Colorado, and our service area begins at the Roller Dam, which is east of Palisade. For those of you who have traveled on I-70 through the valley, you've probably seen the Roller Dam across the Colorado River, at which we divert water for the Grand Valley Water Users and for Orchard Mesa Irrigation District and the Grand Valley Power Plant, to which we are partners with OMID in. But we also divert water there for the Palisade, Mesa County irrigation districts also, some of which we deliver directly for them. And then, as Taylor said, our system runs on about 50 miles on out to the Utah line. All of the irrigation companies in our area are deeply involved in the recovery program. We sit right atop the 15-mile reach, and our compliance and support of ESA compliance extends to 2,100 water users, many of whom are Colorado River water users on the eastern slope. I'm going to briefly share what the Grand Valley Water Users is doing to address water security in a rapidly changing context and our involvement with system conservation. Water security, as we consider it, is maintaining control and use of our water rights in the face of the changing dynamics of agriculture, climate change, and increasing population pressure and the political complications that come with it. Those issues are complicated by the potential of falling below power levels at Lake Powell, the specter of compact compliance issues, and what actions the state of Colorado, the upper basin states, and the lower basin states, what actions they may take to mitigate or avoid those things happening, and obviously the continuing pressure from municipal users. So if being in the water business wasn't hard enough and keep you up at night, those issues certainly will. I was sharing this thought with one of the fellows that was on the selection committee when I was chosen to be the manager, and he said, "Nobody promised it was going to be easy, Mark." So all of this gets all rolled up into something you've heard about this morning, and that's drought contingency planning, or DCP, and demand management as a part of that. And we did discover the first thing that we had to do was become really fluent in acronyms, is that you just couldn't do this unless you had a whole list of those. So we've got DCP and DM and UB and LP and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure that I know what they all are yet. So from our perspective, then, what is drought contingency planning in the Upper Basin? Well, it's three operations. One is reservoir operations to use some accumulated storage to help either mitigate or deal with a water crisis, reservoir operations. System augmentation, and we typically just say, can we make it snow more? And then thirdly, those failing, is demand management. So if the first two don't do it, demand management gets kicked in, and we think that the chances of coming to demand management pretty soon in this hierarchy is very real. That's where we see risk for us in that with the 80% of consumptive use being in agriculture, demand management typically should be called agricultural demand management for the majority of the water that's been needed. So we feel that as many others on the western slope and many of you in agriculture and elsewhere, that our water is certainly at risk. It is in the center of the bullseye. And when reclamation began to partner with the large municipalities in the West, we began to pay some attention. So we take this discussion regarding drought contingency planning and agricultural water demand management and the threats that they may pose to us very, very seriously. And I think that one of the major advances that we've made with our board and a significant amount of our membership and some of our irrigating associates is that we further realize that ignoring the potential of these significant threats to our water security does not make them go away. They may be unpleasant and they may be unpalatable and scary, but they will continue to exist. And that's the fundamental reason why the Grand Valley Water Users is participating in this program. And I have to add that we didn't do this by ourselves. There's many of you in this room who contributed both financially and otherwise to these testing of these concepts. So we thank you. So that's the fundamental reason. As the issues are going to remain, we need to be involved with them. We had three primary objectives then in investigating these issues: protection, benefit, and participation. And I begin to tell people that we need to add the term patience in here somewhere as well. But from a protection standpoint is that all of these issues related to drought and the reasons that drought contingency planning and demand management are being considered are of critical importance to us. The risks to our interests are too great to ignore. We don't quite understand what the role of reclamation is going to be. And as we are a reclamation project, we want to investigate that. And we want to protect ourselves from poor planning by others. As we tell people, if we want a poor plan, we've got a lot of practice at that right in there at the Water Users. We can do that. But we also want to come out of this deal better than even. Is that we think if our competitive advantage lies with our water, it should be our prerogative to put that to beneficial use and to allow water users to profit from that, either whether it's sustainable and more profitable agriculture or revenue streams that can be assigned to infrastructure, but that benefit needs to be part of the thinking. We had to come up with something that would prepare us for the difficult negotiations that might come our way sometime. In most cases where demand management might be needed or where some temporary, intermediate, compensated amount of water, it probably won't come in the form of a request. It's going to be a demand. And we felt that we better at least prepare ourselves a little bit for that eventuality. And we wanted a seat at the table. Oftentimes agriculture has been asked in the past to participate, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And we've, in our location, not done a particularly perfect job of that, but we felt that the stars were in alignment and we were being asked. We had a unique and perhaps transient and temporary position to actually be involved in controlling our own destiny. And we wanted to make sure that we protected the interests of our rural communities. So what did we hope to achieve with this investigation? Well, we wanted to identify and explore water marketing strategies that did not require the separation of the water from the land. And anytime we usually talk about water marketing, it conjures up the images of sale. And that's something that we have avoided. In our particular system, water is appurtenant to the property. In many of the systems that are in our area, that is not the case. But to separate the water from the land moves us from that truly then leads to a buy and dry kind of a situation. So that was the primary objective, is to look at those kind of strategies. But they had to do the following also. They have to support agriculture. They have to be manageable and beneficial by the irrigation company. They've got to be palatable to the rural community. And it's curious, I wouldn't call our board a bastion of environmentalists, But we spent a huge amount of time in talking about the impact upon their neighborhoods and the community that these things would create. Had to prepare us for these potential negotiations. And we also knew that in today's world that for this to serve us well now and perhaps down the road is we had to identify multiple beneficiaries. We couldn't be the only people who benefited. No individual farm could be the only one that benefited. And they had to avoid unlimited, it can have no unintended negative consequences. So our goals were then, of course, to gauge farmer interest. Will anybody do this? We wanted to test the scalability of a program like this from an organizational standpoint. We had to determine how we wanted to mitigate the costs and risks to the association as well as to the farmers. We have a whole gob of, as many of you do, contractual obligations with people up and down the river. Those could not be sacrificed. And we wanted to explore the benefit. Is there some way that we can benefit as an association here? We wanted to generate questions and concerns, and we wanted to execute a pilot program that had a clear beginning and end. So, what did we do? Well, 2 years of due diligence culminated in the 2017 Conserve Consumptive Use pilot project. This $1 million project, partially funded by System Conservation, also by an ATM grant from the Colorado Water Conservation Board and by TNC, tested the practicality and scalability of aggregating foregone diversion created by voluntary and compensated rotational fallowing on some acres in our system. So the diversion was foregone, did not go into the irrigation system. We leave it in the river where it continues on to the state line, pass over the state line, and eventually being added to system water, if you will, ultimately for the benefit of Lake Powell. So we created 4 program activities, 4 different options, all working around fallow, and I should mention that that isn't always necessarily the best way to create conserved consumptive use, but it requires very little instrumentation. It's easy to verify and so forth, but there's other ways it can be done. That's the way we did ours. And all payment was for participation. We did not price the water. Participants could be in from 4 to 7 months, and a cooperator could subscribe to more than one program activity, all designed to fit in the agronomic operations that are currently used in the valley. Some of the concerns and considerations that we had while putting the program together is that this, from our perspectives, to achieve long-term success, these programs have to work for agriculture and specifically have to work for farmers. Whether that farmer is a tenant or a landowner or both, we went to great pains to try to avoid driving wedges between landlords and tenants and between farmers and farmers. So they were allowed to enroll a minimum of 60 acres up to 240 acres, either of which could not exceed 50% of the acres they farmed in 2016. They had to be able to prove that they had farmed those acres for the previous 3 years and irrigated those at least one time, 1 year. We made about 30 contacts with people that we thought might be interested, keeping in mind we started out with no budget, no plan, no idea. We were asking a great deal in trust from these folks. And a few of them hung on. There was about 13 finally over the course of the months that said, okay, we'll give it a try. We selected by lottery 10 of those 13 based upon the program activities by the cost that they were, and ended up with those 10 participants. We generated about 3,200 acre-feet of conserved consumptive use on 1,250 acres. We think that it was largely a success. If anybody has questions about lessons, we'll leave that for the question period. But what's next for us, and what does that mean about system conservation? Well, we have a 2018 conserved consumptive use pilot program papered up and ready to go. It's a little smaller than the one previously, but since we were the only Colorado applicant that got system conservation funds, we were very thankful for those. That made a 2018 program conceivable and doable. So we're continuing to learn there, and we've also initiated a project called the Beyond Conserved Consumptive Use project. Many of you are familiar with this. We've contacted a lot of folks. This $250,000 project is to continue the conversation regarding demand management as a tool in drought contingency planning. And our intent is to pursue the conversation with all of those who could have an impact upon the future of our water security. And at the same time, continue to search for ways that can benefit both those who may have water to conserve and those who might use it. So you may think of this, I guess, as our efforts to create this kind of a social compact that Bart talked about, that Ken mentioned in Santa Fe a few weeks ago, is that this has got to work for a lot of folks, and it's got to work for agriculture and agricultural communities. So we believe that this conversation has got to include not just the Grand Valley water users and perhaps our associates at Orchard Mesa Irrigation or the Southwestern Water Conservation District or the Uncompahgre, but it's also got to include people outside of the valleys in western Colorado. It's got to have ag waters at all elevations and in all geographies. And it's got to include non-ag water users who have a stake in this as well, not only from their own demand management, but what role they're going to play in agricultural demand management. So this conversation needs to include all of those, plus conservation districts such as the River District, Southwestern, Upper Colorado River Commission, Reclamation, and in our case, the state of Colorado, of course, and others, with an attempt to, the template has to create, it's got to create some solutions to water security, but it's also got to create robust agriculture and robust rural and agricultural communities. And we know that price continues to be an issue, upper basin, lower basin, but to win the hearts and minds of the people that have the water, this cannot become a race to the bottom on price. It won't work. To make rotational and incentivize rotation and new ways to farm work on farms and ranches in the West is that it's got to be a legitimate alternative. It's got to add to farm profitability. So we certainly encourage those who think about the future of system conservation to make sure that that is an element that stays at the top of the list. For those 80%, for those people who control that 80% of the water, you got to win the battles in the boardrooms across the West, including ours. So we know that there's got to be shared benefit, but there's got to be shared burden as well. And I think I can speak for many water users is that we're willing to do our part and look forward to figuring out how we work together on these issues in the future. So there you have it. That's the Grand Valley water users' approach to system conservation issues and demand management. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are approaching the lunch hour. We got a little bit of a late start, so I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask one question, and I'm going to pick on Amy. So one of the things that we hear a lot working on this issue in the Upper Basin is that this is a lower basin problem. And so I was hoping that Amy could just take a minute to describe why is this also an Upper Basin problem, and why should people in the Upper Basin care about lake levels at Powell and at Meade, frankly?
Yeah, and I would say not so at all. Lake Meade levels have a direct impact on the Upper Basin due to the coordinated operations of both of these reservoirs. And in fact, since Glen Canyon Dam was constructed, the need to coordinate operations of main stem Colorado River reservoirs has been apparent, and we saw that beginning with the 1968 Colorado River Basin Project Act, which basically directed the secretary to create guidelines for coordinated operations between the two reservoirs, criteria rather, where I'm kind of stuck on guidelines. I wonder why that is. And then, and that gave birth to the LROC, the long-range operation of the Colorado River reservoirs. Then in the 90s, when the hydrology began to change and there were increased demands in the basin, we saw that we needed to do something maybe a little bit different to coordinate the operations of these reservoirs, and that grew into the 07 guidelines, which in part dictates the coordinated operations of both of these reservoirs. The previous panel, I think somebody put it very succinctly and very nicely. When Meade rides higher, Powell rides higher, and vice versa. So we are kind of joined at the hip with respect to the operations of these reservoirs. So the health of Meade is of direct interest to the Upper Basin.
Okay, well, thanks. So we're going to break for lunch. I assume everybody just follow the crowd, and please join me in thanking the panelists.
Okay. Okay.
So much for all my questions, right? I know, everybody was ready. I hate that. It was a good panel discussion, so